Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 22nd of November 2023. I'm going to somewhat go through this. I don't have a huge amount of sources, somewhat quickly. I say somewhat because I always say that and I always fail. Nonetheless, if you want to know what the lines mean on my map, please pause the video and check out the key there. Let's go to the northeast sector, or axis I should say, from Kupiansk to Svatova and then down to Crimea, where you can see there's no changes to the line until we get to near Crimea down in the south. The ISW says of this area, well, there's a few general points to note. I actually got to the correct place. Right. Nadia Zamria stated, so that's a spokesperson for the Ukrainians, stated on November the 20th and 21st, the Russian forces continue to use Storm Z and Storm V units consisting of convict recruits and punished Russian servicemen in the Kupiansk direction and other directions in Ukraine. General Sisky also noted on the 20th, so Ukrainian general, that Russian forces are deploying reserves and regrouping in the Liman direction in preparation for the continuation of offensive activities. Russian mill bloggers also claimed that Russian forces are accumulating strength and are intensifying offensive operations in the Kupiansk direction. And this builds on previous hints and analysis that the Russians might well be building for an attack in this northeastern sector. I know certain people are worried that this is going to be where the Russians are going to push in a big way next. We shall see. I mean, it might well be building up in the Kupiansk area, but there are also other areas where they've been probing and attacking, such as this kind of Horlivka area there to the west-southwest of Svatova. And there's a bit of a gain here, possibly just a correction for Andrew Perpetua's mapping in the area just to the west of Crimea. Surrey Maps has a bit of a bulge there for the Russians in that area. And we have, as I say, just a minor correction or move for the Russians there. And really, it's a case of coming on to Bakhmut. Not too much to talk about in that northeastern sector. Just to let you know that the situation on the front in terms of weather is starting to change. We've seen a lot of rain having effect with huge amounts of mud in the trenches and with maneuvering. Well, there's also snow in several areas. So stabilization actions are being carried out. The situation is different in different areas of the front. Says Getty. Somewhere the Russians managed to stop and carry out offensive actions. In some areas, Russia continues to storm but meets strong resistance. So real general kind of observations there. We get on to that in a second. I don't think there's any Bakhmut information there. But yeah, as we come down to Bakhmut, we can see that there's no movement in the north, and there are some gains for the Russians, as according to deep state maps, the pro-Ukrainian mappers in the yellow line there, and a little bit for the Russians as far as Syriac maps is concerned, just south of Avdiivka. A little bit of a worry. It is pretty intense around here. Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night was talking about this area that's just constant fighting, just ongoing, non-stop. The Russians are just piling in more and more people. Now, Konstantin, who's someone that contributes to Perpetua's live streams, has his own sort of Twitter handle on Twitter that's worth following. I don't think he's in Ukraine at the moment. He's Ukrainian that's previously fought, but he's no longer in the country. He does a lot of fundraising, and he has also put together a video, a montage of activity, I think, around here of Russians just getting absolutely obliterated from drone activity. And there was, I think it pertains to some consecutive attacks yesterday where the Russians just pretty much lost everyone. So it is very costly for the Russians, but it will also be costly for the Ukrainians, of course. So that is a difficult area for the Russians, but they are making those incremental gains, and that's that calculus, which is that we're prepared to take those losses if we are gaining in some way territorially. Okay, as we come to the New York Shumi area, where's Shumi? Over there. We can see that there is no change to the mapping today. The Russians have counterattacked in this area as far as I can make out. So if we come down to the ISW, not too much about Bakhmut to report. I mean, it is heavy fighting and there are repelled attacks, and as you can see, opposing gains for the Russians. But it says here, Russian forces conducted limited offensive operations northwest of Horlivka yesterday, but did not advance. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks east of Pivdeni. And this is that particular area. So we've got Pivdeni. Where are you? There. It's straight in front of my face. So in this whole area, the Russians are counter-attacking. And as they like to do, is whenever they lose land to the Ukrainians, it'd be interesting to see what comes of this, both from the Ukrainian and from the Russian point of view. How many forces do the Russians have in the area, as well as what are the Ukrainians going to bring to bear there. And then, well, actually, we'll pop into Kenneth Gregg, and I did share this with you this morning, but this is a Finnish fighter who is in Ukraine doing charity work at the moment. He said, let's start with our attack in the direction of Horlivka. Already in June, there were indications that we will carry out an attack in this direction. One of my mates is a sergeant of the maintenance troops, and they were preparing material deliveries in this section of the front. The president has said in interviews that he wanted to attack here before, but was advised against it by the military due to lack of resources. Horlivka is right between Bakhmut and Avdiivka, so our successful attack came as a surprise to the Russians. We have taken a height with a good view in the direction of the city itself. The Russians cannot allow us to advance further in this direction, so they have to bring in reinforcements. Since we have simultaneously carried out a successful attack in Avdiivka itself and recaptured previously lost positions, the Russians cannot take troops from here. If they take them from the Bakhmut front, we will have the opportunity to attack because of the ratio of men will be more even and will favour us. My guess is that they will take them from Vuhledar. What is interesting is that we are apparently reintroducing the tactics that were so successful in Robotina. And as I said this morning, not quite sure what he means by that. But this is the idea that the Ukrainians are attacking here as possibly a distraction to draw troops. Personally, I think it's opportunistic. I think that's what Andrew Perpetua was also saying yesterday. I think that they've probably just done a localized attack, maybe with some local information, intel, made some gains, then thought, oh, hang on, this is good. Got some local forces from the area to continue doing those maneuvers and made some good gains because the Russians weren't expecting them. And then the Russians pull in a bunch of other troops from their local area maybe and stabilize the front. But I don't know that it's anything we'll see a continued concerted effort from the Ukrainians, because in order to do that, they'd have to bring more significant forces from elsewhere. And obviously, where do they take them from? Because everywhere is pretty tough on the front line. And the same goes for the Russians in defense. So if they can cause the Russians to bring up some reserves that otherwise wouldn't have been there without the Ukrainians calling up any reserves, then that is the best outcome of that situation. Anyway, Kenneth Gregg continues, the weather also plays into our hands in two ways. It prevents the Russians from arriving, and because we have better equipment, we can advance more easily. In addition, many of the units have some kind of waders, not as many as needed, but still. Situation on the occupied beach in Dnipro has not gotten worse. Unfortunately, the information blockade is almost total. I'll get back to you as soon as I have some more information. So that's his analysis of the front line, just those two areas. We'll move now to Avdiivka, where you can see some gains for the Russians in one place. It might have seen Avdiivka some stabilization in this northeastern or northern area, to be more accurate. Krasnohorivka, Stepova. There are varying claims. For example, reporting from Ukraine claims that the Ukrainians have clawed back some territory over the railway line towards the east around Stepova. Now, I've not seen this backed up anywhere else, but he does use video footage to support his claims. The question would be, if the Ukrainians have pushed back in this area, has it been a sustainable pushback, or is it just one of these, right, we'll push back but then actually withdraw our troops back to where we started, and actually the lines don't change? It's difficult to say. We go to the ISW in the area. They say Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces advanced north of Krasnohorivka and in Stepova, so that would be directly against what reporting from Ukraine said, and reiterated recent claims that Ukrainian forces withdrew from Stepova, though the ISW is not seen any visual confirmation of that. So the claim is that the Ukrainians have pulled out a step over, but then, of course, the reporting from Ukraine said they are launching an attack from there and are making ground. So who do you believe, right? What else is there to say? We'll go and look at what Rebar has to say actually in a second. We'll finish off with the ISW. But Barabash, who is the Avdiivka military administration head, stated that Russian forces have increasingly been using vehicles to conduct assaults southeast of Avdiivka, where there is asphalt, so where there's tarmac, while continuing to use infantry to attack on the flanks of Avdiivka, where there is soil. Barabash noted that Russian forces are still attacking with considerably more infantry than vehicles in the area. So infantry heavy, particularly in a northern area where they're having to fight across fields and muddy lanes and whatnot, whereas where they've got solid roads in this industrial area, this more urban environment, they are using more vehicles. Interesting observation there, if true. And we have seen a number of vehicles get hit in this industrial area to the southeast of Avdiivka. The Russians supposedly making some gains in one area of that as they attempt to take the whole of the zone, trying to encircle it maybe a little bit from the south here and clear out any remaining pockets of Ukrainians. At least that's as far as Syriac Maps is concerned. We'll now look to see what Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says. So this is from 3 p.m. today. This is relatively recently, yes. So 3 p.m. on November the 22nd came from, interesting, because that came from, that'd be local time. That's where I'm getting confused. That's my time, and that's their local time. Right, okay. So the Russian armed forces continue to develop success on the Avdiivka section of the front. However, it can be expected that in the near future, the enemy will concentrate part of the reserves in this direction, slow down the advance of the Russian troops further to the west. According to some sources, today on the southern flank, Russian assault units managed to occupy 5 buildings in the industrial zone with a rush. The advance in this area is particularly valuable due to the fact that the Ukrainians have been building fortifications here since 2014. There was no counterattack in response to the surprise attack, as the Ukrainian forces did not have time to bring in reinforcements, which allowed the Russian attackers to successfully gain a foothold in the new positions. So generally a positive map for the Russians there, and I would imagine the Russians are in the ascendancy and do have the initiative on their side. Now, when we go back to the ISW, we can see that as we come to the south, really, I've not highlighted anything until we get to Kherson. That's not to say things aren't happening, but it's not really detailed in the ISW, and there's no real territorial exchanges. There is a little point of note here south of Novomikhailivka where Andrew Perpetua shows that the Russians have moved forward. His map is showing an advance that's looking to go more in line with what Syriac Maps says of the Russians. We know that here there's tough fighting. The Russians have created a grey zone right up until the edge of Novomikhailivka village, and they have been sending columns of assault vehicles over the last sort of month or two. It's been an area where they've been putting consistent pressure. Konstantinivka is the more valuable town. That's what Andrew Perpetua was talking about yesterday. How this road is worth protecting, has strategic value. So Novomikhailivka has its use in terms of being a buffer zone for Konstantinivka. But we'll see how that turns out going forward. But active all along the front lines to differing degrees, though. Velika Novosilka, activity around Pryutny, I think, again. And then coming on to Robotyne, where there is still obviously fairly heavy fighting, but no changes to the mapping. And so that brings us now to Kherson, and to an area where I'm just going to begin with what I've said in the past few days, which is this is an area that the Ukrainians, started doing really well, and the Russians were piling in. From what I can gather, it may not be the top forces. There were reports yesterday from that video feed from a Russian soldier that they've got Storm Z units here, so convicts, these like Well, no, he didn't say stormtroopers. He said stormtroopers that were kind of blind, broken troops. Injured people that are being sort of cobbled together. So that might talk to a low force quality that the Russians are bringing to bear to try and stop the gap. However, that can work if you get enough boots on the ground. It doesn't matter if the quality is somewhat lacking. And I think they've stabilized this region. We haven't seen too much pushing or territorial exchange in favor of the Ukrainians over the last week. The maps have stayed rather static. We'll go to the RSW first and then look elsewhere. The Ukrainian forces continued operations on the left bank of the Dnipro River and reportedly advanced on the 21st. So there are claims of their advance. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces attacked from Krynky and entered the forest area near the settlement. This again, the same thing that we've heard really for a couple of weeks now, is that they are moving south in the forest area, but evidently that is happening at a very slow pace if the maps are not changing day in, day out. Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces continue to hold positions in Krynky and near the Antonivsky Bridge and the small railway bridge 6 kilometers east of the Antonivsky Bridge. Geolocated footage published on the 21st indicates that Russian forces advanced northeast of Krynky. Russian MOD reported that elements of the Russian 810th Naval Infantry Brigade are operating in the Kherson direction. And this is a brigade that was hit with that HIMARS strike, possibly on the concert, although there are claims that that concert where the Russian singer died was actually south east of Donetsk at where is it? Here, Starobasheve. That's the name of the place, and I'm still trying to work out whether there have been two strikes or there are two places called Starobasheve, or it's mistaken or whatever. But it either happened there or in Kherson or in both. But yeah, the 810th are operating in Kherson, and it's the 810th that suffered in that attack, if it is one and the same attack. Okay, now going to some of my other sources. I think I finished there. Yes. So we go back to my sources here. We have what am I doing? Aeronaut units hunt down Russian positions in Krynky and Kherson on the left bank. So this is what the ISW is saying indicated a Russian advance. So these are Russian troops in Krynky, in a position in Krynky. We'll look to see where that puts them or not. I don't know why it sometimes does that. So we'll try that again. Just press enter. There we go. So if the Russian troops are there, then that is worrying for the Ukrainians, because it would indicate that the Russians have pushed them back. Now, whether that is pushing back from the south and getting into the Ukrainian, or probably it's all one big grey zone really, or whether they've pushed in from the northeast, I can't tell. I don't know, but that is worrying that is where the Russians are, if that is time-stamped to the day before. Now, Ukrainian soldiers liberate a village on the left bank of the Dnipro River here. These Ukrainians have lived under Russian occupation for more than 1.5 years. Eyes full of tears when they see the soldiers again. This is one of those heartwarming things. I'd like to know where this is. I'm not aware. I mean, the worry is that I'll get hit with a copyright infringement for that music. So I'll just turn the music down a tad. But these people are evidently happy that they have been liberated. You've got that woman there in tears saying, I don't know what. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know where that liberation is taking place. You see the fog in the background of there, often fairly foggy around that river at this time of the year. Yeah, just don't know where that was. A couple of bits of news coming out from the area this afternoon. So JDAM strike, another one. Interesting that recently we've been hearing of these JDAM strikes in the Kherson region, which would indicate that the Ukrainians are confident enough to send their planes within sort of 50 kilometers of the front line to drop those JDAMs, and that the JDAMs are being effective. So that says two things. It says the air defense has been degraded around Kherson, most probably Russian air defense is being degraded by the Ukrainians, and that electronic warfare probably isn't what it has previously been, and that is potentially allowing the JDAMs to be used without being jammed. That's just speculation for me. We know they've had some problem with jamming recently, over the course of the war. It would be great to see these dumb munitions that have been given guidance and glide capabilities to be used with greater impunity, as the Russians do to the Ukrainians. They are using their own aviation FAB 500 bombs to great effect right across the front line. So anyway, this is hitting what P-Star 11 says is probably a command post on the left bank of Kherson, not far from Novomayachka, which is south of Krynky, very close to where all the activity is taking place. Here it is, Novomayachka. So there is a command post or something that's been hit there. And I don't know if this is referring... No, this is something else. No, there was another strike in the area as well, but I haven't brought that here because I thought it might actually be the same one. But this is P-Star 11 again saying Ukrainian partisans are actively fighting near Krynky. Quote, at a strong point near Oleshki, at least 3 Russians found their deaths. Several more were wounded and will no longer be able to fight. The grenade flew right through the window of the house where they spent the night. So partisans at maybe Kazachi Lahiri, that's been circled there. If not, then Oleshki are active in giving the Russians a hard time. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. And then we have the Euromaidan Press that's got an article on activities around Krynky. So let's just dip into this. I like these articles because they're not really articles; they're just short summaries of events, easy to read. You guys. So UK intelligence says Krynky battles undermine the Russian hopes for quiet Dnipro sector. This is actually coming from the UK intelligence updates. So the fighting in Krynky on the Russian-controlled eastern bank of Dnipro and Kherson represents a setback for Russian strategy and their withdrawal from the western bank last year, underscoring unexpected engagement intensity despite the fighting's smaller scale than elsewhere on the front, according to the intelligence update by the UK Defence Ministry posted today. This persistent combat reflects a significant deviation from Russia's intended military posture, aimed at consolidating forces and maintaining tranquility in the sector. The ministry tweeted, in southern Ukraine, fighting has continued around the village of Krynky, where Ukrainian Marines maintain a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. The ground fighting has been characterized by confused, dismounted infantry combat and artillery exchanges in complex wooded terrain. Ukraine has made particularly effective use of small attack uncrewed aerial vehicles, so drones. I don't know why they can't just say drones these days. While the Russian Air Force is conducting significant numbers of sorties in support of frontline troops, predominantly launching munitions from beyond the range of Ukraine's air defences. The fighting around Krynky is on a smaller scale than some major battles of the war, but will be considered highly unfortunate by Russian leaders. Russia withdrew from the west bank of the Dnipro River a year ago, almost certainly aiming to hold Ukrainian forces west of the river, keep the sector quiet, and free up Russian forces for elsewhere. Now, that doesn't tell us too much, really, but that's a fairly positive outlook for things taking place there. But again, I go back to a slight worry that things have stabilized and actually the Ukrainians will find it difficult to expand their bridgehead. I guess we'll have to see over the next 24-48 hours, see whether that's the case and whether the Ukrainians can eke out a bit more territorial advantage and gains in that sector. Right, that's the end of the Frontline update. Not a huge amount of data coming out there. Generally positive, or more positive for the Russians than for the Ukrainians. A lot of positional fighting for the Ukrainians and stabilization of some of the areas where they had previously been having success, Horlivka and Kherson. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.